Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, I've got something a little different for you. Instead of a card, I've created some Halloween home decor using the framed Frights stamp set from the new Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous 2024 Halloween release. While this particular make might not appeal to everyone, I had fun with the process and I wanted to share the how-to with those who are interested in learning how these came together. Please feel free to use products from your stash to recreate something similar. However, if you are interested in any of the products I'm using, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. Just click on More to see more. When you shop through those links, you're supporting me at no extra cost to you, and I really appreciate that so much. So for this card, I'm going to be focusing on the framed Frights new stamp set from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. And I just felt like this stamp set lended itself well to just being the sole focus of the project I'm going to be sharing today. So along with that stamp set, I'm going to be working with these little frames that I found at Michael's. So you might look at any other like local craft store, but they're just like 5x5 shadow boxes made out of wood, and we're going to be altering those. And the other supplies I'm going to be working with, I'm going to be using some black acrylic paint and some distress paint and scorched timber. When I'm doing, because I'm going to be using quite a bit of paint, I'll just use something that's a little less expensive than the distress paint so that I'm not wasting my good stuff. So these are the paints I'll be using, but you can use any acrylic paint. You don't have to use distress paint at all. So just any kind of acrylic paint will work for the painting. And then the other supplies you're going to need is some distress collage medium, the distress crackle paste opaque, and then for the stamping using some archival ink and black soot, and then also some scorched timber distress ink and vintage photo distress ink. And also going to be doing a little bit of some distress watercolor pencils and pumice stone, old paper, and lost shadow. If you don't have watercolor pencils, you could use regular watercolor pencils if you have a different brand, or you could also use these colors in the distress inks and use those for the coloring. I also have a distress crayon and walnut stain, and then just some other tools. I've got some different brushes, water brush, you could use a paintbrush and water, palette knife. I have a craft knife to do some distressing with, but you could also use the little distressing tool, and then a foam blender. And then as far as the paper goes, I'm using distress watercolor paper for my stamping, and then I've also pulled out some of the Tim Holtz Ideology backdrop papers, and this just happens to be a pattern that was in a previous Halloween pack. I'm not sure what year it was, but I just pulled out something that I felt went well with my project. But you could also, you could pick out any paper that you like, pattern paper that you like, to work with this. Now this project takes quite a bit of time for drying, so just kind of keep that in mind through the different steps. So even though this will be kind of sped up and showing you the process, I'm not going to have you sit and watch it dry with me. But as far as with the little frame, I used a little screwdriver to remove the bracket here, and then I also removed the twine, and it sits up really well on its own, so you can attach this back on there or put a different kind of hanger on, or you could leave this hanger on. I just wanted to be able to paint the whole surface so that I could kind of use it however I wanted so that the back looked nice as well. And now for the painting, you just want to make sure your paint's well mixed. I don't use a palette, I just kind of use the surface I'm working on and just get a bunch of paint going there. And then you can just use a little bit of water if you need to kind of thin it out to get it moving. And then just continue painting the entire surface with the black paint. Make sure you get all the little nooks and crannies. And then just let that dry, and then you can flip it over and do the other sides and the bottom and all to get it finished. So then the next step is we're going to apply Distress Collage Medium to the entire surface. So I'm just using a brush and applying that to the inside. Now that the black paint is all dry, that's probably the biggest thing I can tell you going through this whole process is just make sure you let each layer dry before you move on to the next layer. It's just never going to dry because of how many layers we're going to be putting on here. So the next step, this is just a personal preference for myself. I like to put a layer of the collage medium over the paint. That will then allow the Crackle paste to adhere a little better. But again, that's just kind of a personal preference. I find that the Crackle paste tends to kind of flake off a little bit if I don't do this step, and it depends on like the look you like. You know, if it doesn't bother you to have it kind of flaking off, which gives it a little more of a distressed look. So again, it's kind of a personal preference with that. But then I'm just going to apply the collage medium to the outer edge of the frame, and then the top edge for sure. And then if you want to put it on the inside, you can. It doesn't really matter. And then, you know, if you wanted to make the whole thing like a little bit more waterproof, you could kind of use it to help with that. But I don't really see that I'm going to be planning to get this wet or anything, so just because of the nature of what it's going to be, just a decoration piece. As you can see, I didn't have some spot somewhere in here was not completely dry, so it'll just take a little longer for this layer to dry, and especially if it's humid where you are, things are going to take even longer. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're going along here. So if the paint's not totally dry and you do get some on your brush, you might want to wash off your brush just so you don't contaminate the collage medium. Our collage medium is all dried, so the next step we're going to do is the Crackle paste. And we're just going to use a palette knife to apply that to the outer edge here. And you can just kind of put that on. You don't want to put it on super, super thick because again, it's just going to take longer to dry. But you can kind of get a nice little coat on there. And then you don't need to worry about putting it on the bottom of the frame. So just going back to where my holes are here from the hanger. So I just want to make sure I don't put it on the side that, or get it on the right side here. And I also want to put it along this edge here. If it gets a little bit in the inside, that's okay. Like right there where it kind of dripped in, you can kind of wipe it up if you want, or you can let it, you know, you could coat the inside too if you wanted around the edge there. Just you don't want to put anything on the inside here because we need that to stay smooth and flat. Even though we don't put anything on this bottom piece, we're gonna put it along the bottom edge here that you can see, of course. And then for this step, just like the others, you just want to make sure, you know, you give it plenty of time to dry. You don't want to try to speed up the drying with this Crackle paste because it won't crackle if you try to dry it faster. So just set it to the side and let it dry and let it do its crackle thing, and we'll go on to the next step then. And then of course when you're all done, just want to make sure you go and clean your palette knife right away. So if the paint's not totally dry and you do get some on your brush, you might want to wash off your brush just so you don't contaminate the collage medium. While the paste is drying, we can go ahead and do some of our stamping. And like I said, I've got a piece of Distress Watercolor cardstock here, And I'm going to be working with the framed Frights stamp set. And I'm just going to select a couple of the images. And I want to make sure I leave a little bit of space down here on the bottom because I'm going to add the little wording to that area later on. So I just need to make sure I have enough space down there for that. And I think we'll do these. Just stamp a couple of the images here. Or should I do the ghosty? Yeah, let's do the ghosty because the there we go. And then I'm going to use the Archival ink in Black Soot. So this is a waterproof ink. And I'm using that because I'm going to be doing some watercoloring to add just a little bit of color and interest to these images. And this is just a little tool called the Stampendable that just kind of helps with adding some pressure when you're stamping these larger images. And I usually find with the Archival ink, when I'm working on the watercolor paper, I usually have to stamp it a couple times to get it as dark as I would like for it to be. Just because it tends to kind of soak in pretty good, but I think that looks pretty good. I don't want it super perfect because I do want it to have a little bit of a distressed look to it. But get that one a little bit better there. There we go. And then now I'm going to stamp the sentiments just kind of along the side here. So you could just do this on like a scrap piece of paper even if you wanted. So we're gonna cut those out. And again, if you want, you know, a little bit darker, you can, but I'm not going for perfect darkness here. So there we go. All right. So now we're going to take the watercolor pencils and color in these images. And I'm just using a water brush, but you could also use a paintbrush and water if you like. And just going to pull some of that color off the pencil with the brush. And there's not really any rhyme or reason. I'm just going to kind of add color here and there. With this is the pumice stone. Just kind of use that to color in some of the areas here. Maybe put it more in like some of the darker areas. And then get a little water going, kind of help blend that out. I'm going to take the lost shadow, kind of do the same thing. Add some of that. Just add a little more. It's kind of an aged look. Like I'm kind of going for like a vintage printed image. And you know, if you want a little darker, more color here and there. Just kind of play with it till you kind of like how it looks. Like I said, I'm not going for any kind of a perfect coloring image. Just wanting to add a little bit of, just kind of a little bit of an aged effect to it. the frame, I'm going to add some black soot. Light wash of color here around the frame. And then I'm just going to repeat that same process on this other image, just kind of coloring it in with the watercolor pencils and going from there. So now I'm going to use my paper trimmer to cut these down to 3 1/4 by 3 3/4 inches, making sure to leave that larger space underneath the image for the sentiment. And so then once they're cut out, they kind of look like a Polaroid photo, but that's not exactly the look I'm going for, but I just wanted kind of a antique vintage style photo. And now we're gonna distress these pieces all a little bit more. And now we're gonna use that old paper watercolor pencil. And I'm just gonna use that to kind of add a wash of color through here. I think I'd mentioned in the beginning, you know, if you don't have the watercolor pencils, you could also just use the distress ink. Just smush the ink pad onto your craft mat and then pick up that ink with a brush. You probably wouldn't need much water with the ink pads, but you could add a little water if you needed to. And this. One of my favorite colors for kind of aging and distressing paper to kind of give it an old vintage look. As you can see, I'm not trying to get a lot of color, just add a little interest here around the edge. And then right there was like some of the black soot had kind of washed over into that off the edge, so I just kind of used the water there to kind of erase that away. I'm going to do that same thing over here, just a little bit of it kind of out of the lines. And then you just can set these to the side to dry, or use your heat tool to dry this layer of things because we're not finished yet. I'm going to go and add a little more color here. All right, so now the next step to add to the vintage aged look of these, we're just going to add some vintage photo kind of around the edges of these with the blending tool, just kind of working in a circular motion. And the paper, you know, if it does kind of warp up, you can just kind of bend it opposite of the way it's curling just to kind of help flatten it down a little bit better. And then just work the brush around the edges there. Even here, kind of curl that opposite. And you kind of use your hand to kind of help hold it down a little bit too. But once we get to the step where you're adhering this, the paper will be fine. It'll flatten out just fine. Same thing here. Just gonna rub this along the edges. And then now we're gonna take, you can either take a craft knife or the distress tool. And then you're just gonna kind of rub that along the edges of this. I personally, I don't know why, that tool just, it's not my favorite way to do this. I love using the back of my craft knife and just rub it along the edge of the paper. Of course, if you do decide to use your craft knife, just be cautious because that's a very sharp blade on there. So kind of keep your fingers out of the way and just take your time. And I'm just going to repeat that process on all the rest of the papers. All right, and so then once you have all the edges kind of distressed, then you can kind of go back in with your finger and just kind of, you know, break some of those edges and kind of curl some of the corners in if you want, just so like, you know, kind of tear it a little bit. Not looking to like get a big tear all the way across the paper or anything, but and just add a little bit of more distress to it. Do the ends, all the ends of the paper like that. Just kind of add a little more distressing to it. And we'll do the same thing with these little pieces too. And if your hands are getting really inky, you might need to stop and, you know, wipe them off so you're not smearing it where you don't want it. But just kind of play around with that, and then yeah, then just set that to the side to dry. If you get some ink, another, you know, thing you could do is just dab it off with a little paper towel. And then we'll just dry these, and these will be ready to assemble. And then one last little step here is I'm just going to spritz this with a little water, kind of around the edges here, and take a paper towel. Give that just a second to kind of activate that ink, and then I'm going to dab over it with my paper towel here just to lift off some of that, just add a little bit more distress and interest. You can see the little speckledy dots that adds, and then dry that again, and then those are ready to go. And then the last thing I did was adhere some double-sided foam tape to the back sides of all of these pieces, and then we'll just assemble them just to give them a little bit more dimension and interest in the finished design. So the next part for this is just to take some of the Halloween ideology backdrop papers, or any pattern paper for that matter, or you don't have to use paper at all if you don't want to, and then just cut them down to size. So what I did is I just took a ruler and then kind of measured what that internal size was, and then like, so for these it's 4 3/8, and I cut the paper just a teeny bit larger than that, and just to make sure it was going to fit down in there, and then I can just cut little slivers of it off as needed to kind of shave it down to fit in here. And then I just ink the edges with some of the Scorched Timber Distress ink, and then you can just adhere that inside there with some Collage medium. So our Crackle is dry, as you can see. Look at that grungy goodness there. So the next step is I like to add another layer of the Collage medium to help this adhere even more to the surface. Again, you could totally skip this step if you'd like. I just find that it stays on there and it doesn't tend to want to kind of crack and fall off, which, you know, some people like that look. If I want it off, I'll remove it before I do this and then add the Collage medium over it. So if you wanted to take like a sanding tool or something and kind of scrape off some of this, you could. See, like right there, that piece came off, and I don't really want that gone. So let's see if I can get it to stick in there. There we go. And I'll just leave that alone and let it dry. And then, yeah, and then I just set this to the side to dry, and of course, clean your brush. If you do happen to have gotten some of the Crackle paste on the inside of the frame, you could just take some of your black paint and kind of touch that up if you like. So now I'm going to add some distressed paint in Scorched Timber, and we're going to paint over this surface with Scorched Timber. And if you kind of want to thin it down a little bit, you can. Just add a little water to it. I'm just going to paint that over the surface and then let it dry. And then the final step, once the paint is dry, is to take the Walnut Stain Distress Crayon and just rub that over like the raised areas here and there, and just adds another little bit of some interest and texture to things. And you can kind of, I like to use my finger to kind of smear that in a little. Just seems to, kind of the heat from my hand kind of helps it spread a little easier. This point, like if you're flipping this around and you see any spots that maybe you missed where like there's still maybe some white showing through, you could always go back and grab like that. I could go back and get some of the paint and add that there to just kind of cover that up. Just adds a subtle little extra something to the project. Definitely not something that you have to do. So there is a look at the finished frame. All its kind of crackly, grungy goodness. To finish that off, you're going to take your pattern paper or whatever paper you want to put inside, and then you can just put some collage medium on the inside there and then stick that down, adhere that in place, and then you'll take your little stamped image and remove the adhesive and adhere that to the center, and then you are finished. Here's a look at the set of Halloween frames I created. To finish off each one, I created some crinkle ribbon using seam binding that I colored with black soot distress spray stain. I tied 2 lengths of it into a bow and adhered it to the top of the frame using a hot glue gun. I hope you enjoyed seeing how these Halloween home decor frames came together using the Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous Framed Frights stamp set. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.